Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Denmark's Prime Minister says US threats over Greenland make absolutely no sense and could end NATO. Officials in Switzerland reveal the ski resort bar where a deadly fire broke out on New Year's Eve had no safety checks for 5 years. And French President Emmanuel Macron hosts Ukraine President Zelenskyy and key allies in Paris to discuss security guarantees for Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. Now, the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, has said it makes absolutely no sense to talk about the need for the United States to take over Greenland and warned that it could result in the end of NATO. She made the comments after President Trump doubled down on his threats to annex the Danish territory. His latest calls come after the US successfully captured Venezuela's leader over the weekend. I'm now joined by former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, Guillaume Long. Thank you so much for your time. Great to have you back on the show with me. I just want to start talking about Venezuela. And apparently armed police have been seen patrolling the streets of Caracas with reports of shots being fired near the presidential palace. Do reports of violence on the streets of Venezuela come as a surprise?
No, not really. I think everybody's on high alert after what happened on Saturday. It appears to have been a false alarm. We don't really yet know what exactly happened. Maybe some drones that were flown a bit too close to the presidential palace. But yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised they're reacting pretty quickly now to any kind of alert. There's a lot of tension in Venezuela as threats continue to be voiced by the Trump administration.
And can you talk to me a little bit about the power vacuum that the removal of Nicolas Maduro has caused in Venezuela? Because obviously the US now have President Maduro in New York at the moment in a prison cell. But what does that mean for Venezuela? Because there's been reports, and I've been hearing lots of people saying they're too scared to leave their homes. They don't know what's to come next.
Right. I mean, it's a very unstable situation for sure. But I mean, I'm not sure to what extent we have a power vacuum right now. I mean, essentially what's happened is that the United States did not go through with regime change. They managed to abduct the sitting president, the head of state, and they've taken him to the United States. But they did not go further than that. So the pro-US opposition, if you like, has not been put in his place. And the person who's now in charge, the acting president of Venezuela, is President Maduro's former vice president, and all of President Maduro's governing structure, his ministers, but also the military hierarchy, the security apparatus remains in place. So the Chavista apparatus, the Chavista political apparatus and security apparatus remains in place. So it seems to me that the Trump administration this goes back to a tension between, I would argue, Trump himself and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, what we might call the neocons inside of his administration, who have been pushing for this regime change, some of them even pushing for troops on the ground to make sure that the regime change actually happens. But others inside the administration, probably President Trump himself, having probably more cold feet about going all the way, fearing a political and a military quagmire. And so I think probably in terms of Trump, the appetite was just to do this hit and run, to seize successfully, as it turned out, Maduro and abduct him and take him to the US, but not go any further than that. And then to try and make a deal with the new authorities. This seems to have been Trump's preference. I'm sure others inside of his administration would have liked to go much further.
But it's really interesting because Donald Trump was asked who was in charge of Venezuela again, and that was last night, and he said, me. But I just want to move on because following the Venezuela attack, EU leaders have called for restraint and respect for international law. What do you make of this response, which many people might actually view as pretty weak?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the international community, certainly the diplomats I've been in touch with throughout Latin America, but elsewhere in the world, have been quite shocked by the European Union's and its members' muted response, essentially saying we're monitoring the situation, calling for the respect of international law. But of course, international law has already been violated, crucially Article 2 of the UN Charter, but also the whole of Chapter 7, I would argue, and every single one of those articles of the UN Charter. And so, calling for respect of international law, but not condemning, which is what many countries have done. They're condemning the violation of sovereignty, the violation of international law, the abduction of a sitting head of state. I think it's a very muted response. And I think it's both a political and moral mistake, because obviously we do not want to live, and neither the European Union wants to live in a world where might makes right. And, international law is there for a good reason, I think. So it's a mistake on that front, but it's also a strategic mistake because it could backfire in the mid to long term if the United States decides to go after other governments or other territories, including ones that are under the control of European Union countries. So I think it's to kowtow to Trump like that, to really be so submissive to Trump. I don't think he understands that language. I think he understands the language of firmness and force, and he doesn't respect people who are submissive like that. So I think really for the European Union, it's not a shining hour for them, no.
And it's really interesting because we are seeing that EU members, the coalition of the willing, and some US delegation are meeting today in Paris, and that's to discuss peace in Ukraine. And when we are looking at the situation that's happened in Venezuela, I guess that there could be some parallels drawn to that and some concern when it comes to Russia.
Yeah, I think double standards is becoming the norm, and European unions have not been, have clearly using different measure sticks for different situations, which I think doesn't work in their advantage, neither in the European context, certainly not on the issue of Ukraine, but also I would argue in other contexts, including the one that you just mentioned in the context of Greenland, right? If Trump does make a move on Greenland, will the Latin American countries and the countries of the global south say, oh, we're monitoring the situation, which is pretty much what Europe said in the context of the attack on Venezuela? Yeah, if you want others to stand by your side and to defend your interests, but also the more universal interests enshrined in international law, then you yourself have to defend international law, yes.
And Colombia has actually beefed up troops on the border with Venezuela. What are the reasons for this, and which other Latin American countries are on high alert? Obviously, your position with Ecuador, you would know a lot about that. Is Ecuador concerned?
I mean, this is an unprecedented situation where you have a US president making extremely explicit threats on a number of countries after having ordered strikes on a neighboring country. So he's made explicit threats against Colombia. President Trump's also made very explicit threats against Mexico and against Cuba. Cuba is probably the most concerned country right now because there has been, the Trump administration sees Venezuela and Cuba as intrinsically linked. Marco Rubio himself thinks that the road to Havana leads via Caracas, and he is himself, of course, of Cuban origin, is very passionate about the Cuba issue. So I think Cuba is certainly a very potential target. I don't think it would be as easy to do a military operation as they did in Venezuela. Not that the Venezuelan one was particularly easy, but I think it would be even harder in Cuba. This is a government and a revolutionary regime, if you like, that has resisted all sorts of, well, regime change for now many, many decades, right? So the Cuban security apparatus is a very tight ship, I would say, tighter than the Venezuelan. So I think that wouldn't be that easy, but there is a strong economic stranglehold, an embargo on Cuba, which the United States keeps on tightening. So I think Cuba is certainly in the line of fire of the United States. Now, with regards to Colombia, I think probably that's more rhetorical in the sense that I think it's unlikely that we see military strikes on Colombia. There are elections this year in Colombia, so I can imagine the Trump administration focusing much more on intervening in the elections, which is what it's doing now systematically in a number of Latin American countries. Trump has intervened successfully in a number of Latin American elections this year, and well, last year in 2025, including Honduras, including Bolivia, and of course in the Argentine midterms when he offered a big bailout to the Milei administration, which had a big electoral impact. So I think that's more the strategy we're likely to see vis-a-vis Colombia. But just to finish on what you were saying, yes, I think it is a major source of concern for the whole region. If sanctions and the general process of isolation of Venezuela on behalf of the United States succeeded in creating such a huge crisis for Venezuela and such a massive migratory crisis, which ended up in a massive humanitarian crisis for the whole region, actually, one can only imagine what war would do for the neighborhood. So any strikes on Colombia or any deepening of the strikes on Venezuela could create a regional Latin American crisis, including having consequences on Ecuador and other countries of massive proportions that have never really been seen in, certainly not in contemporary history of Latin America. So I think there's a lot of concern in the region.
Guillaume Long, thank you so much for joining me to speak to me about that with your insight and analysis. For more on Trump's threats to Greenland, I'm joined by Rasmus Brun Pedersen, Associate Professor in International Relations at the Department of Political Science at Aarhus University, which is in Denmark. Rasmus, thank you so much for your time. Mette Frederiksen says she thinks Trump is serious about taking Greenland. What happens to NATO if America makes a move for the territory?
I think it depends a little bit on what type of move we are talking about, because there are kind of two strands right now in the U.S. approach to Greenland. There is this aggressive one that we have heard over the last couple of days, where they talk about a hostile takeover, more or less, of Greenland, which of course will spark an immense crisis in NATO, because that will have the alliance leader attacking other allies. But there's also another option, namely that they are trying to persuade Greenland to pursue independence from Denmark. And when you have an independent Greenland, then the hope from Americans is that Greenland would then choose to a closer alignment with the United States. So depending on which of these options that are realized, then I think we would have different types of crisis. But if we see kind of the more aggressive diplomacy, the aggressive rhetoric, then we will have a serious crisis in NATO.
European leaders have voiced support for Greenland and Denmark in a joint statement which was released today. Rasmus, will Donald Trump listen to Europe, or does he believe they are just not strong enough to stand up to America?
I think at least what we have heard from the American positions is that nobody in America believes that anyone in Europe would fight for Greenland, meaning that it would be more or less like a kind of a free ride if they wanted to take it. But on the other hand, I think what's the Danish, at least the Danish strategy, but I think also the European strategy, is that they are trying to multilateralize the crisis, in the sense that it will increase the cost for the United States to make an invasion or try to take Greenland. So from a Danish perspective, what we are trying to do right now in our diplomacy is not to provoke the United States, set some limits, but also tries to draw in a lot of our allies in order to signalize that there will be immense diplomatic costs if the United States decided to take Greenland. So I think that's what's going on right now, but I don't think it will kind of intimidate Trump as such. But again, it's one way to increase the costs for any adventurous Arctic politics.
Greenland is sitting on $4 trillion in rare earth minerals, and that's according to various reports. Would it not be beneficial if the territory and its people are taken over by the US and America does take control and invest in Greenland and the mining?
There's a little bit technical stuff here because, Greenland is a part of Denmark, but Greenland has a home rule, meaning that the Greenlanders are the ones who are has the responsibility for who will invest and who will do the mining in Greenland. Of course, there's a lot of potential on Greenland, but it should also be remembered that it's very expensive to do mining on Greenland because of the nature, because of geography, and because there are no inland roads. Meaning that it's very, very expensive to do these things and to invest. But as it stands right now, if somebody were to come up with a great investment plan for mining, for instance, in Greenland, then Greenland has stated that they are open for business. They really like to have a foreign investment. So if you have a big consortium of American investors, I think they will be very welcomed by Greenland. Kind of a takeover by the United States, either in the form of a free association agreement or through a kind of formal integration in the federal structure, that's not necessary because Greenland is open for business if anybody wants to invest. But there is a reasons why we haven't seen this massive wave of investments yet, simply because it's not something that you can profit from.
The Biden administration, the European Union and China have all tried to vie for influence on Greenland at some point. Are Greenland's untapped rare earth minerals and its strategic location now becoming a new battleground between the US, China and also Russia?
Yes, I think the answer to that is a clear yes. Greenland has kind of moved from kind of a neutralized zone that was not dangerous for the great powers into kind of a conflict zone because it has become a part of this global battle for rare minerals. And that's basically the reality, and this is we need to kind of lay out strategies that kind of take that into consideration. So it's become politicized, it has become securitized, and we see kind of the great powers have been having an interest in this. But that being said, kind of the Chinese interest in investing in Greenland was really a big thing 11, 12 years ago, but they was never realized simply because that the Chinese found out that it was something that they couldn't profit from. So we haven't seen a strong Chinese interest actually investing in China for the last 11, 12 years. So it is a little bit of a myth in American politics that the Chinese are just waiting to step in and take over China on the economic side.
Yeah, because that's interesting, because Donald Trump has said that there's Chinese ships very close to Greenland in the past when he's been speaking about this subject. But right now, Rasmus, you and me are talking about Greenland. It's been a hot topic after the situation we saw, the capture of the Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro. How concerned is Denmark right now that Donald Trump will make a move? Do you think that this is actually a possibility and it could happen in the near future? Or do you think this is just posturing by the US?
It's a little bit difficult to evaluate. I think in the Danish, at least, kind of a normal way to deal with this thing, and this is also how we have thought about it in Denmark, is that the United States would pursue kind of a diplomatic strategy. They have appointed a new special envoy that will take care of Greenland, as they say, and his mandate is to try to convince the Greenlanders to seek independence and after independence, move closer to the United States. And so I think from a Danish perspective, this is what we would have expected. But after the invasion of Venezuela and the bombing and the kidnapping, then it seems that there are more options on the table, and also that the United States are willing to use military force to get their will within their sphere of influence, meaning that we have to take that into considerations when it comes to Greenland. So I think it's also in that light we can have seen this relatively strong Danish response to the pressure from the United States, but also the reactions from the European leaders, or the leaders from the great European countries today, namely that this is basically unacceptable, and again, it will really threaten the cohesion in NATO if we were to see an American invasion of NATO territory with the claim of getting security, because they have access already. We have established treaties with the United States that basically opens Greenland for a military presence if the United States wanted. During the Cold War, United States had 17 bases on Greenland. Now they have one. If they want to reopen these bases, they can just ask, and Denmark will say yes. So again, from a Danish perspective, it is a little bit unclear what the United States really want, except kind of territorial expansion.
Rasmus Brun Pedersen, thank you so much for your time and for talking to me this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Now, officials in Switzerland have revealed the ski resort bar where a fire broke out on New Year's Eve hadn't undergone any safety checks for 5 years. 40 people were killed and 116 injured in the tragedy. Police said 83 remain in hospital. Today, the mayor of Crans-Montana also answered a series of questions and apologised for the lack of checks on venues, but said he would not resign. Take a listen.
Les contrôles périodiques n'ont pas été effectués.
Periodic inspections were not carried out between 2020 and 2025. The Municipal Council became aware of the situation after reviewing the documents submitted to the Public Prosecutor's Office this past weekend. We deeply regret this. The courts will determine the impact of this oversight on the chain of events that led to the tragedy. We will assume all the responsibility that the courts determine. In line with the ban on fireworks already imposed by the municipality before December 31st, we have decided to immediately prohibit the use of any pyrotechnics or similar devices inside public spaces or establishments of any kind. The shock is still there. Our community, our town, each and every one of us is constantly in touch with the victims of this tragedy, with their families, with their loved ones.
For more on this, I'm joined by CGTN Switzerland correspondent Julia Hamilton. Julia, good to have you back on the show with me. Obviously, we spoke in the hours after this tragedy unfolded, but a lot was revealed about the incident at the bar today by officials. What more do we know following this press conference that was held?
Numerous shortcomings have been revealed by the Swiss authorities in that press conference today. We heard from the mayor of Crans-Montana, who said that the venue, La Constellation, hasn't been checked for safety for 5 years. And he said that as of today, he doesn't have a reason for why this happened, because according to the town's local regulations, these safety checks should have been carried out at least annually. So we'll have to wait and find out why this has happened. Also, he has offered no resignations and said that they are profoundly sorry to the families. Also, they've announced that there is a ban now on all sparklers and pyrotechnic fireworks inside all the venues in the area. And also, it's now up to the investigators to find out all the details.
And there's also now a criminal investigation underway into the French couple who managed La Constellation bar. What's the latest on this, and have we heard from them at all at this stage?
That's right. So a criminal investigation is underway right now, and we do know that the owners of the bar, they haven't been arrested by the police, but one of their venues, because they own 2 venues, the La Constellation and another venue in Crans-Montana, well, the other venue has been closed. And so Jack and Jessica Moretti, that's how they've been named in local media. They're a French couple, and they've owned the La Constellation bar since 2015, and they are charged with negligent homicide, negligent bodily harm, and negligent arson. And of course, there are many, many questions remain in this investigation as to why, to the fire safety of this venue, to the layout of this venue, of why these checks haven't been done, was the fire extinguishers available, and so many questions that the investigators will have to establish in the coming days.
And there's also been an update on the victims and those who are still recovering in hospital. What have authorities said about them?
That's right. 40 people have been confirmed dead, and 21 of them are Swiss. And in fact, the victims are of 12 nationalities, French, Italian, and other European nationalities, also one from Australia. And right now we have the toll of 116 injured people, and more than 8 of them still remain in hospital, some of them in very serious conditions like an induced coma. Of course, those people, they suffered severe burns to their bodies, so that's why we hope that they will make a recovery. And so the helpline to actually help the families and relatives of the victims and of the injured has been deactivated now. So we do know that the police have identified all the injured as well now, and they have been the families have been notified. We don't know the names or the other details of all the victims and all the injured, but we do know that they are very young. The age ranges from 14 to 39, and the youngest person is a 14-year-old Swiss girl. So indeed, a very young crowd among the victims and the injured.
And Julia, the region and the world are still shocked from the tragedy, and memorials are set to take place this week, aren't they?
That's right. The whole country is shocked and is in disbelief that this happened in such a place, in such a time. And people have been coming to lay flowers and light candles and pay respect and tributes to the victims in Crans-Montana itself over the last 5 days. Also, there's been so many tributes on social media. There has been a condolences book set up online, and more than 3,000 messages have been left in that book already. And there's been many tributes on social media, including one by the local Swiss clubs in a shape. The skiers formed a shape of a heart to pay respect to the victims. And also on Friday this week, there will be a National Day of Mourning in Switzerland, and the ceremony will take place at around 2 p.m. local time, when church bells across the whole country will ring. And that ceremony will be held in a nearby town, Martigny, which is a bigger town than Crans-Montana, because also there's some snow forecast coming for the weekend, and over these weather and safety concerns, the memorial will be moved to the place called Martigny. But the locals in Crans-Montana will be able to follow that ceremony live from one of the venues there as well. So, and the Swiss president, also the French president, and potentially the Italian president, many European leaders and officials are expected to be attending that ceremony on Friday.
Julia Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us. South Korea is hoping for a new phase of relations with China after leaders from 2 countries met in Beijing this week. It was Korean President Lee Jae-myung's second meeting with China's leader Xi Jinping in 2 months. Chris Gilbert reports.
Smiling for the camera, even if it's his own. Lee Jae-myung relished the chance to snap a selfie with Xi Jinping on Monday. The meeting signals Beijing's interest in boosting economic cooperation and tourism with Seoul, as China's relations with Japan hit rock bottom over a policy dispute towards Taiwan. China says it places high importance on relations with Korea and is willing to work towards friendly cooperation.
Friends grow closer with more visits, and neighbors become more familiar with more exchanges. As a friend and neighbor, China is ready to work with the Republic of Korea to work towards win-win outcomes and push forward the development of a strategic cooperative partnership.
The 4-day trip is the first state visit to China by any Korean leader since 2019. Bilateral ties soured under Lee's predecessor, disgraced ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol, who was close to Japan and critical of China. Experts say Lee is walking a diplomatic tightrope between Tokyo and Beijing. High on his agenda is lifting China's unofficial ban on Korean pop culture, believed to be a protest against Seoul's 2016 decision to deploy a U.S. anti-missile system. He's also looking for support in engaging diplomatically with North Korea.
This summit will be an important opportunity to make 2026 the first year of full-scale restoration of Korea-China relations. I believe that efforts to develop the strategic cooperation and partnership between the two countries into an irreversible trend of the times will continue.
The two countries signed 15 agreements at a summit, including documents on technology, intellectual property, and transportation cooperation. Leigh-Ann wraps up his trip on Wednesday. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelenskyy and other key allies in Paris today in a bid to agree security guarantees for Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. Heads of state and top officials from more than 30 countries are meeting alongside US mediators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Zelenskyy met Trump recently and said his plan to end the war with Russia was 90% agreed. We can now speak to Director of the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine and former UK MP, Roger Casale. Roger, thank you so much for joining me. Let's begin right now with European and US officials. Of course, they're meeting in Paris, as I just said. But are events in Venezuela and President Trump's threat to annex Greenland overshadowing efforts to end the war in Ukraine?
Good evening, Leigh-Ann. Yes, they are. What Venezuela tells us is that the rule of law, international rule of law, is not going to be respected. It is an encouragement to, particularly to authoritarian regimes like Russia and China and others, just to take matters into their own hand with complete disregard for international law. And the Greenland saga goes on. I mean, a lot of European leaders are biting their lips about Venezuela. I'm not sure they'll be able to do that about Greenland, which is really, frankly, very offensive to not just to Denmark, but to Europe, to all of Europe, all the European leaders. And yet, it's clear that without American support, it is very difficult to see how Ukraine can continue to be supported now and in the longer term, which is what the conference in Paris is about.
Roger, I just want to ask you a little bit about the European response to what happened in Venezuela and Donald Trump's threats when it comes to Greenland. I was speaking to a guest a little bit earlier, and he said that he thinks the European response was wrong. He thinks it was too muted and it wasn't strong enough. What do you make of that?
Well, it is muted. I agree with that. It is muted. I think a judgment has to be made about what the priority is here. We are living in unprecedented times, and the Europeans are very weak in comparison to the Americans, for example, and Donald Trump. And they need America's support because the future of Ukraine is the future of Europe. And so I think we have to show a little bit of understanding. A judgment needs to be made. You know, we elect leaders to take decisions and make a judgment. But I think we can all see them biting their lips. Whether it is worth speaking out and at this stage about Greenland when the focus is on Ukraine, I'm not so sure. I think there does need to be a strong response about Greenland. And I think there has been from the Danish government, and there will be from all the European leaders, and I hope also from the UK. But I'm not sure that today is the day for that. I think that today is the day to get together and focus minds and try to get some agreement on a strategy for supporting Ukraine.
Let's talk about that. Roger, what can we expect from the Coalition of the Willing meeting in Paris? Because there's been a lot of criticism that the Coalition of the Willing just meet and seem to talk, but there doesn't seem to be anything else concrete that happens.
Well, don't underestimate how important it is to talk, because it's only by talking that you're going to get a consensus. And I think a strong statement that will come out of those talks that underpins the resolve of the Americans and the Europeans to stand with Ukraine now and in the future, and to do whatever it takes to support Ukraine against the Russian invasion and Putin's aggression. I think that is not to be underestimated, and that is what I hope will come out of the talks. Delivering on that strategy, on that common strategy, is a whole different ball game, and I think that is going to be very challenging. But the first step is to indeed to have those talks and to reach a common position, a common strategy between the United States and Europe and Ukraine on how best to defend Ukraine and to achieve a ceasefire and to support Ukraine in the future if such a ceasefire is achieved.
Zelenskyy said in recent days a deal was 90% ready. But Russia, which we know occupies around 20% of Ukraine, is pushing for full control of the country's eastern Donbass region as part of a deal. So my big question, Roger, is the main sticking points still seem to be what is holding things back. And we don't seem any closer to a resolution or to Russia agreeing to anything.
Well, you're right. It is very difficult to read what is going on. We'll have to wait for the announcement and the statement. But I think the key agreement that is going to be needed is one between the Ukrainians, the Europeans and the Americans. Let's remember last year we were having discussions between Zelenskyy and President Trump without involving the Europeans. The Europeans have insisted that they are at the table. And I think if we can get an agreement between the Americans, Ukraine and the Europeans on what a ceasefire deal could look like. And let's remember we're talking about a ceasefire. Then they can go jointly to Russia in a strong position. And all I can say is that as far as Putin is concerned, you have to be in as strong and united position as you can possibly be to be able to expect any kind of result from that. Because first of all, he doesn't have an interest in a ceasefire. He wants to continue to prosecute the war. And secondly, even if he does sign a ceasefire agreement, policing that is going to be very, very difficult. But I still think it has to be achieved. The killing has to stop. There has to be a ceasefire. And there has to be a process, a political process has to be begun. But that's only going to work if Europe, Ukraine and the United States are united, and it can present a more powerful front to Putin than what he's seeing at the moment. Putin will respond to power, and the Europeans and Ukrainians and the Americans need to present themselves as united and as powerfully as they can.
Roger, I don't have much time left, but I just want to ask you a really quick question. Is the US still a reliable partner, especially for Europe?
The US is a reliable partner. This is one administration that is behaving in a very erratic and unpredictable way, entirely inconsistently with American history and what we're used to. But I think it would be a mistake to jump to conclusions about whether the United States as a country is a reliable partner anymore. We can't control that in Europe. What we can control is what we do, and we have to be as strong and as reliable and as stable as possible. We have to be more independent, and that's not to do with whether the United States is a reliable partner or not. That's to do with the fact that Putin presents a risk, a threat, not just to Ukraine, but to the whole of Europe. And the Europeans are not in a strong enough position at the moment themselves. We need to build up our defense expenditure, the coordination between our defense systems. And I think getting lost in a discussion about whether the United States is a reliable partner is a distraction. Europe needs to focus on what we can do, and we need to be much stronger than we are today.
Roger, brilliant to have you on the show and great to have all your insights and analysis. Thank you so much for your time with me.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann.
Pleasure. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Nestle has issued a global recall of some baby formula products over concerns they contain a toxin which can cause food poisoning. The Food Standards Agency says the toxin, which is highly heat resistant, can lead to symptoms such as nausea and abdominal cramps. The affected infant formulas were on sale in both the UK and also Ireland. AI chip designer NVIDIA have announced a new tech platform that will help self-driving cars think like humans. The company's CEO says the new AI model, Aplomoa, will navigate through rare scenarios on the road and drive safely in complex environments. Shares of the firm rose slightly by around 0.8 in after-hours trading following that announcement. A reminder of our top stories. Denmark's Prime Minister says US threats over Greenland make absolutely no sense and could end NATO. Officials in Switzerland reveal the ski resort bar where a deadly fire broke out on New Year's Eve had no safety checks for 5 years. French President Emmanuel Macron hosts Ukraine's President Zelenskyy and key allies in Paris to discuss security guarantees for Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire deal with Russia. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. And we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.